Hello, this is Chris Ferrara. I'm with the Fatima Center at its conference, Fatima, the Path to Peace. We're in the lobby of the Scotiabank Center. I have with me William Jasper, who has given an excellent talk today to the conference. And I wanted to talk to him about another issue that New American Magazine has pursued. I'm looking at a cover of your October 2011 issue, Protecting Rights, Loyal Americans Targeted by the SPLC, meaning the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, I've been victimized by this group. A lot of Americans have been victimized by this group. Apparently, the Southern Poverty Law Center, or SPLC, is running out of people to victimize. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your research into the activities of this, for want of a better term, witch hunting organization of the loony left?
Poverty pimping organization. The Southern Poverty Law Center is founded by Morris Dees, an attorney in Birmingham, Alabama, and he has built this organization into one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest, nonprofit organizations in the world. In my article on the Southern Poverty Law Center that you held up there, we covered a lot of their background and their fundraising. He has built a reputation upon several key cases that were very high-profile cases where neo-Nazi and Ku Klux Klan type of groups, the White Aryan Resistance or the Aryan nations, were sued because of serious activities that they undertook, either beatings or killings of people. So those were admirable cases. Nobody could disagree with them in that the people being targeted were really bad guys. And so he built up a big reservoir of sympathy, and he also parlayed those cases into huge fundraising programs. The victims of these cases got thousands of dollars. He has gotten millions of dollars. Their tax returns for 2010, as I've given that article there, were about $229 million that they had in assets. Much of $229 million, $250 million in assets, much of which they had in Cayman bank accounts, Cayman Island bank accounts.
How does a nonprofit sit on that much money?
Well, this has brought them under attack by many of their colleagues on the left. Some of them, I think, just out of envy, they go, "Hey, wait a second, how come these guys are getting so much money?" But it points to a motive here where it is less than noble on their part. The victims, many of whom members of the family have lost their life, been brutally murdered, as I say, get a few $1,000s. He uses it as a fundraiser. He says, look, we're fighting these forces of evil, these extremists, usually right-wing extremists is how he puts it. And of course, neo-Nazis are not right-wing. They're National Socialists. They're left-wing. They're collectivists. The same with the White Aryan Resistance. They're almost all virtually racial collectivists and mostly Hitlerite National Socialist people. They have no connection with anyone who is a legitimate conservative, Christian right, anyone like that. But he has used the cachet that he has developed by fighting a few of those high-profile cases to be portrayed as this great big champion of liberty and of civil rights. And so he has the media in the palm of his hand. Not only that, but he has ingratiated himself into government during the Clinton administration under Janet Reno, Attorney General. He got his program, his people at Southern Poverty Law Center, placed on the Justice Department training programs so that they train the Justice Department attorneys, train the FBI, the FBI law enforcement facility. We have SPLC.
There's a partnership of some kind,
yes,
unofficial perhaps, between SPLC and the FBI.
But the SPLC has a very definite political agenda. They're radical left-wing. And a very good example of that. Much of their supposed intelligence is supposedly aimed at the threat of terrorism, which they always say is right-wing terrorism. But they have a curriculum program for the schools, which they say is to stop teaching hate. It's called Teaching Tolerance. And who do you suppose they profile as exemplars for our students around the country to emulate? One of their most indictable offenses in that regard is their Teaching Tolerance program, where they have profiled William Bill Ayers, the
underground terrorist,
communist, self-confessed communist terrorist who during the 1960s led that bombing spree of the Weather Underground, bombing the U.S. Capitol, many of our other historical monuments and whatnot. Well, they profiled him and held him up as this great exemplar for our children to emulate. And they call it the unqualified embrace. You know, they just embrace him. Contrast that with the people that they're attacking. I opened my article there with pointing out a vicious attack that they made on Professor Carol Swain. Now, imagine if you get up in the morning and you pick up your newspaper, or you go on the internet to your local newspaper. This was in Nashville in her particular case, and you see Carol Swain is an apologist for white supremacists. Now imagine if, put your name in there and you see your name there is the first thing you read in the morning. Now who is Carol Swain? She is a black professor, a woman, who has written books on white supremacy, opposing it. And I mean, you'd think she'd be a natural ally of the Southern Poverty Law Center. Why are they attacking her? Well, they're attacking her for a couple of reasons, she said. One, because she's a conservative Christian. And two, because she wrote a book on immigration. They take the position at the Southern Poverty Law Center that if you're against illegal aliens, if you believe we ought to patrol our border, that you're automatically a racist. You're doing it for a racist motive. You can't have any motive for it. She said, she did her book on debating immigration, and she said, no, most of these people that are pushing for stronger immigration controls are concerned about our national security and the many other things, so they're not automatically racist. So they attacked her. They've attacked all of the black evangelical ministers who have come out against homosexual marriage.
You mentioned one here, Reverend James Meeks of Illinois, and there's a picture of him in the article, who's opposed to gay marriage.
Yes, and I list a whole list of, they have profiled all these, and they say they are purveyors of hate because they are opposed to gay marriage. So this has become a tactic they've used over and over again. They go after James Dobson because he's opposed to homosexual marriage and his focus on the family, Concerned Women of America, Catholic Family News, all these different Christian groups.
Me.
Yes, you've been
The Remnant, the newspaper that I write for, whose editor is Michael Matt. I mean, you add up all of these groups they defame as hate groups. The sum total of the analysis that they're offering the public is that hate and conservative Christian or Catholic are synonymous.
Absolutely. Basically what you can say is a hate group is anyone that the SPLC wants you to hate.
Well, you know, that's a pretty vast assortment of people.
Absolutely. If you look at all of the groups that they have now, they publish every year what they call their hate map, a map of the United States, and they've got all these designations on it for each state. And if you put your cursor on that on the internet, then it pops up, okay, who this circle is here, who this circle is here. And there's several things wrong with the hate map.
What's the problem with the hate map?
Well, there's several problems with it. First of all, they have never provided any of the information, the data, supporting all these designations on there. They'll say there's they try each year to show that there are more hate groups, because if they can show that hate groups are expanding, then they can create more fear amongst their client base, get more money, and they can convince people that the threat from extremism, right-wing extremism of course, is on the rise, and we have to do something about that.
They say it's a hate group. and they have a map that says it's the hate map. So you look at the map and there's hate groups on the map. What's the problem?
Yeah, so a number of different scholars, and myself included, have contacted. Okay, I'd like to see the data. You have all these. You have in Alabama, you've got 45 here. In Texas, you've got 300 here, etc. Who are those groups? And let's have the hate data on them. They won't provide it because they don't have it. And in fact, several of the groups that they have cited in various towns apparently don't exist. In fact, they have not been able, and when we've checked with people in these small towns, they said, never heard of it. It's not at the post office. It's not, there's no data to back it up. And so, first of all, they're vastly exaggerating this. They're actually apparently creating false data in order to create hysteria.
You cite someone named Laird Wilcox, and I find this most ironic. A recognized expert on extremist groups. In other words, his analysis of SPLC is an analysis of an extremist group. And here's what Wilcox says, according to your article in New American. The SPLC, says Wilcox, specializes in, quote, a highly developed and ritualized form of defamation, a way of harming and isolating people by denying their humanity and trying to convert them into something that deserves to be hated and eliminated. My friend Mike Matt, who was the editor of the Remnant newspaper, awoke one day, as you say, to pick up his morning cup of coffee and find out that his newspaper had been added to the hate map along with the town of its location. How would that make someone feel? That would certainly make me feel dehumanized and reduced to an object of hatred. And what was the underlying data for this assessment? And Remnant is a traditional Catholic newspaper. Right. That's enough to be designated a hate group.
Well, and the sinister part of this is something that more groups should find actionable legally, because what they are doing is not just defaming, that's bad enough, taking away your good name. They're actually endangering you because they have set up a special relationship with the federal government, with the fusion centers of the Department of Homeland Security and Justice Department. These fusion centers are tied into local law enforcement. They send out their bulletins, and so they say these hate groups are out there and they're dangerous, and they're particularly dangerous to law enforcement. So what does that do? That puts a target on anyone who's designated as a hate monger or an extremist, so that law enforcement people are automatically going to be very wary of them and possibly trigger twitchy when they pull them over, because they see that they have a bumper sticker, which the SPLC, it's a pro-life bumper sticker, and the SPLC particularly goes after pro-life groups. They say they're all dangerous, and they cite a couple of examples of abortionists being shot and killed, and they say, well, see, that means that pro-lifers are dangerous terrorists. So if you get a law enforcement agency that treats this seriously and gives this information to its people, and many of them do because they are getting all this federal money, you are actually endangering the rights and the lives of those people whom you have targeted.
Wasn't there an incident recently where someone armed with information supplied by the Southern Poverty Law Center went into an organization and shot up the place?
Absolutely. That was James Dobson's group. The
Focus on the Family is designated a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center.
So
incredible.
So that's, now, if you or I or any conservative group had done something, somebody had acted on that information, you know that we would not have ever heard the end of it. But this was hushed up. All the media who hang on every word that Morris Dees and Mark Potok and Heidi Bayerich and the other spokesmen for the SPLC give out rarely say anything critical of them. There have been some. I mean, the Birmingham newspaper and the Atlantic magazine and some liberal and liberal left organizations have finally called them out on their both their fundraising practices and their promiscuous use and defamatory use of their hate labels.
I want to tell you an amusing story. We went down to Norfolk, Virginia, Michael, Matt, and I, to watch Heidi Beirich's presentation of the hate group du jour, traditional Catholics, or what they call radical traditionalist Catholics. And this presentation focused on one person in particular, but what I found comical about it, it was just Heidi and her PowerPoint presentation. And she didn't know how to hook her PowerPoint presentation up to the projector, so Mike Matt got up and did it for her.
That was a hateful act on his part.
She didn't know who he was. Even though she had exposed him in his newspaper as a hate group, she had no idea who he was. She has no idea what the Remnant really stands for, or what traditional Catholicism is all about. Her article on the Remnant and radical traditional Catholics is just filled with laughable mistakes. But that's the level of their operations in the field. It's pathetic.
It is.
And yet they have $230 million in the bank.
Well, but now I'm told that was in 2010, that it's closer to 300 million now. But the serious part of this is that they are really trying to criminalize as well as demonize us, so that what we do exercising our rights as Americans under the First Amendment are in danger of being prosecuted or executed by law enforcement who think that we are some dangerous threat.
Here's what Wilcox, Laird Wilcox says in the article that you wrote. Watchdog groups can have a profound influence on law enforcement tactics in a number of ways. But both the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center publish newsletters and other material directed at law enforcement, often giving these agencies names from their files accompanied by suggestions of dangerousness. Like all witch hunting operations, they occasionally find a real witch, but mixed with a few witches are thousands upon thousands of people whose politics may be extreme, but with no illegal intent whatsoever. End quote. Not only people whose politics are extreme, but people whose politics and religion are mainstream Christian.
Mainstream, and it is.
They're running out of villains. Now they're going after everybody.
It's the SPLC that is really extreme. As I said, that one indication of Bill Ayers is just one sample. Many of the people on their board of directors are members of the National Lawyers Guild and the ACLU, both of which, the National Lawyers Guild is official legal bulwark of the Communist Party. The American Civil Liberties Union, founded by professed communist Roger Baldwin, and had several top members of the Communist Party on its board of directors, Helen Gurley Flynn, when they got started. And so they are the ones that have the affiliations that need to be examined and explained, and yet they point at people who are very mainstream, harmless, have never been engaged in any kind of criminal activity, and try to demonize them.
You know, Bill, I'm looking through this article you wrote, and it's just devastating. You've got subcaptions on crucifying Christians. They're going after black conservative Christian ministers. They're going after James Dobson, founder of Focus on the Family. Basically, they're going after the entire conservative Christian mainstream, as well as what they call radical traditionalist Catholics, which leads me to ask you the question, in view of all the money and the connections with the FBI and the Justice Department that this organization has, wouldn't it be fair to say that the biggest and most powerful hate group in America is in fact the Southern Poverty Law Center?
Well, I cannot think of any other organization that can even compare to them. I mean, nobody else is attacking in this kind of vicious way such a wide swath of Americans with no plausible justification. I mean, they're attacking, it's fine for critics on the left to attack the National Right to Life and the National Rifle Association and say that you disagree with them on abortion, or to disagree with the Conservative Caucus because of their positions on this bill or that bill. But they have gone far beyond that. We can't emphasize that enough. They are talking about not just defaming and villainizing demonizing people, but actually criminalizing them. They're going to law enforcement, to the state attorney generals, to the Department of Justice of the United States, to these fusion centers, and they are painting targets on fellow Americans. And nobody on the right, on the conservative movement, is doing anything like that to those on the left, except those that are authentic terrorists and their official supporters.
Here's a list that you compile of just some of the Christian groups that they have put on their hate map, smeared and defamed. We mentioned James Dobson and his focus on the family, Beverly LaHaye and Concerned Women for America, James Kennedy and his Coral Ridge Ministries, Scott Lively and his Abiding Truth Ministry, David Barton and his Wall Builders Ministry, the American Family Association, the Family Research Council, the Chalcedon Foundation, Americans for Truth About Homosexuality, the late Jerry Falwell's Liberty Council, Traditional Values Coalition, Catholic Family News, one of the co-sponsors of this very conference, a Catholic newspaper, the Christian Action Network, and the National Organization for Marriage. I mean, who isn't a hate group?
Well, right.
People?
Now, it's very interesting.
Other than the left wing. They're exempt.
In the last decade, they've taken their capital, both cash and the public goodwill that they've gained from their earlier high-profile cases, and instead of really focusing on the hate groups like the neo-Nazis and whatnot, they have particularly allied themselves with the militant homosexual lobby. And I've been at a number of their conferences, and they're trying to use the civil rights issue to bring homosexual rights, special homosexual rights and homosexual marriage to the fore, and to beat into the ground anyone who opposes their homosexual agenda. They have brought many open homosexual and lesbian attorneys and activists onto their staff, and with their huge multi-million-dollar slush fund, they can afford to do this. And so they have really taken the homosexual agenda, hijacked the civil rights issue to beat anyone who is pro-life or pro-natural marriage, and to make them totally illegitimate and to criminalize them.
Well, that's another terrifying initiative of the dictatorship of relativism, as Pope Benedict calls it. The forcible imposition by state power of acceptance of a vice that the church has always taught cries out to heaven for vengeance. And I'm not going to be intimidated sitting here talking to you about it when I say that it is a vice that cries out to heaven for vengeance, and that, as Pope Benedict himself said, the recognition of gay marriage will mean the end of human civilization.
Absolutely.
And yet they're trying to impose it upon us by force of law. Just recently in New Jersey, they enacted a statute, and I believe there's a similar one in California, which makes it a criminal offense for a psychotherapist to attempt to conduct sexual reorientation therapy so that someone tormented by the vice of homosexuality can become sexually normal again and fulfill his vocation as God has ordained it. As a husband and father, or wife and mother. Well, they want to make that a crime.
Well, and as we see, they don't want to stop at just saying they have equal rights to homosexual marriage and lesbian marriage. They want to make it de jure impossible for you to even say you disapprove of it. And so when the couple, the cake baking shop in Oregon, decides that they're not going to bake a cake for a lesbian wedding, they're hammered into bankruptcy by the state because they have offended this couple by not sanctioning their union. I mean, there's all these other cake makers, bakers around there, but no, you are not congratulating us on this, so you will not be allowed to exist. And Hillary Clinton in the State Department, before she departed there, implemented this program there, which the militant homosexuals demanded, that if a State Department employee comes out and announces his homosexuality or lesbianism at the State Department. If a supervisor just maintains silence, that is interpreted as an oppressive condemnation. So it's gone to thought control. We can't just even keep silent and not say anything. We have to publicly come out and say, oh, isn't that wonderful? Oh, yes, I approve.
There was recently a decision by the New Mexico Supreme Court upholding administrative action for violation of the human rights law of New Mexico against a photographer who refused to photograph a gay wedding.
Yes.
And the chilling language in one of the concurring opinions was to the effect that, well, this is the price one pays for citizenship.
Yeah.
And it seems like the Southern Poverty Law Center, in league with the Justice Department and the FBI, is going to, in an evocation of neo-fascism, use the power of the state to impose this kind of conformity on people by labeling them hate groups and destroying them if they stand up to it.
And it should be obvious on the face of it that this is the biggest hate. They won't even allow you to be neutral. You have to adopt their position, or they are going to label you a hate group and make you an object of hate throughout the country.
Well, I guess there's a good side to this, and we know as Catholics that the devil always overreaches.
If people will realize that, hey, they can't just be laughed off or shrugged off. They need to be opposed and exposed, and completely. They need to be taken to court on a number of these cases, and the same medicine applied to them. Some of those millions of dollars need to go back to their victims.
I think that's a great way to end the interview. I thank you for having the availability to talk about this with us. This is a really vexing problem, and the overweening power of this group has to be addressed and resisted. I think you're right about that.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Bill.
You bet.
Okay, that was great.
Pray a great deal and make sacrifices for sinners, for many souls go to hell because they have no one to make sacrifices and pray for them.